Coach, it's great to see you again. Look what I did for you. So here's Kevin. He's going to be the producer of the interview.
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure.
And this is Ryan. He's going to be co-hosting
Nice
this
to
with
meet
me.
you.
I'm Albert. He's going to be part of the interview
nice
as
to
well.
meet you.
Albert and June.
Nice to meet you too. Are you German, Albert?
I went to Germany in September, and
No, I mean because of the name.
I guess that makes yeah, for him that makes him German. I guess. He thinks in a very, very interesting ways.
Yeah.
Wow, what a background you got here. Yeah.
this is actually pared down.
Coach, are you going to do any food or? No. Oh, I thought you were going to do. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to what's expected to be a great interview. I'm Steve Hahn. Here's my friend Ryan Wee, Kevin Kim, who's the producer on this show, and lastly but not least, Mr. Jürgen Klinsmann. Coach, how's it going? How are you? Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, great to see you guys. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us here in Costa Mesa. Coach, so 10 months since you last were in Korea. How have you been? How has life been? I mean, you look happy as ever, so it's great to see that. So how has life been for you since leaving Korea?
No, life's good. Obviously, the months after finishing off the job with the Korean Federation have been months where you were thinking of what went right, what went wrong. You always summarize your work afterwards and think, okay, maybe you should have done this different or that different. Overall, I have to say it was a fantastic experience. I'm very, very thankful for this 1 year with the Korean team. I met a lot of super nice people and learned. I learned a lot about Asian football. Learned a lot about how they prepare, how they go towards tournaments. And obviously then having a tournament getting played in Qatar is something very, very different. I was at the World Cup obviously in Qatar for working for FIFA with a coaching staff that I was guiding for FIFA. And that was great experience. But then being in the middle of it as a coach yourself is another dimension. And so these are moments that you always will appreciate. You always will look back and says, "Wow, this was pretty cool." No, overall, I have to say I'm very thankful.
Coach, I'm gonna take you way back right now. Let's see how much I can test your memory.
I'm not so good in history.
1988, I believe, was your first visit as a footballer in Korea when you landed there to play in the Olympics in Seoul.
Yeah.
In that tournament, you didn't score in the group stage, which is surprising, considering your goal scoring rate. But you scored a hat trick against Zambia. But then you missed a penalty against Brazil in the semifinal, which Germany lost.
Yeah.
And then you scored in the bronze medal game against Italy to win a bronze medal in Korea, your first and last Olympic medal. What was that experience like? And what were your first impressions of Korea at the time? Like, were you anxious after missing the penalty and losing, or were you traumatized after missing a penalty? Like, what was that experience like?
Well, the feelings that all of us had, so at that time, only players were allowed to play the Olympics that didn't play for the senior team in a World Cup qualifier or World Cup yet. Right. So we were mostly younger players, but that experience was unforgettable. Playing in Olympics, I think is probably the coolest event that you can ever play. Even better than a World Cup. I mean, not maybe meaning-wise in terms of football, but in terms of experience, I still remember those days, and we were started the tournament in Busan because the soccer team was not allowed yet in the Olympic Village because they needed a stadium for other events. And then later on, after the Zambia game, we then moved up to Seoul and became part of the Olympic Village. But in Busan, for example, we went out with the sailing team out on the ocean and we watched them perform there and they invited us. And then when we got finally to the Olympic Village, most of the parties went on already because all the athletes that were done with their competitions already, they threw parties. And so we got in there right in that and enjoyed basically the atmosphere. And you went to the cafeteria and you had you got your food on a tray like everybody else, and suddenly there's Gabriela Sabatini, one of the best tennis players in the world, and you're like, whoa, and so this experience to be part of an Olympics is something very, very special. Then we had the semi-final game, obviously, as you said, with Brazil. We actually dominated that game. We had a very good team going in there, and we missed a penalty in regular time a couple of minutes before the end. If that's the goal, 1-0, we move on into the final. we missed it, so we had to go in the extra time, and then we lost, because of my missed penalty as well. But then finishing it off with a medal, was very, very special. Unfortunately, we soccer players were not allowed to then to stay for the closing ceremony because Bundesliga was running and all the Bundesliga clubs were calling us back. Sure. So we had to fly back right away overnight to Germany to play Bundesliga again. But overall, this experience has always been with me. I have the bronze medal still at home, and every time I watch an Olympics, and I tell, maybe players that get the opportunity to play in an Olympics, I tell them, you gotta go, gotta experience it. No matter how big you are, that's why Messi, towards the end of his career, wanted to go again, and it's something very special. And for me, that experience, first Busan and then Seoul, was super. We just walked around with big open eyes, and we took it all in.
Coach, I was a little too young in '88, so I don't have a memory of that. But my first memory of you as a player was '94, when you scored a brace against Korea in a game, to be fair, a game we should have won, I feel like. But going into that game, Coach, that was, I believe, your first game against Korea as a player. What was Germany's impression of Korean football? Did you think that we were minnows, or did you, or after the game, has your outlook on Korean football changed after how that game was played out? What was that whole experience like? Because you scored a banger of a goal in that game.
No, from a European perspective, those days, Korea and Japan has always been seen as powerhouses, even in '94. Okay. So there was no second we underestimated Korea going into that match. What we kind of underestimated that match was the heat. It was 48 degrees centigrade. 48 degrees centigrade, because it was a noon game in Dallas for the television rights in Europe. So they can watch it nicely in the evening, the Europeans. And so when we were up 3-0, and I think we played really well the first half, we started to we couldn't run anymore second half. And Korea came back and scored the first one, scored the second one. And we were just hanging in there, said, this is crazy. And I tell you, 5 minutes more in the game, Korea would have equalized that game. That's how we felt. So we kind of felt lucky to win the game. And move on then and go into the round of 16 and that stuff. But my days playing professionally was never a moment where we would have faced Korea or Japan and feeling like we are superior. We always took them very seriously. It is going to be hard work to beat them, and then later on, even as a coach then, in 2005, we lost. Sure. And so even the fans in I think in Europe, or especially in Germany, had always respect for East Asian countries.
You spoke about the game in 2005. That was your first game coaching against Korea, from what I know. And then you also faced Korea as a U.S. national team head coach right here in LA in 2014. So that tells me you faced Korea in 3 successive decades as player and coach.
Decades.
Which is
made me feel really old. Yeah.
Coach,
it is what it is. Yeah, what it is.
So over this 30-year period, how much did Korean football change from the limited times that you've seen them during that time? And do you feel that Korea as a country, are we more competitive now that you've coached this team for the last year or so? Or did you actually realize that Korea is still lagging a little bit behind where we should be?
No, there's no way that Korea is lagging behind. So what happened the last 30 years, if you look at the bigger picture, the Americans always say it's from a 30,000 feet, perspective, is that the key was, I think, over the last 3 decades, is step by step get your best player into the best leagues in the world. Every basketball player wants to play in the NBA, sure. And so it is in football. It is the best players have to play in Europe in the top 5 leagues if you want to kind of be able to constantly measure yourself with the best in the world and to improve to that level. And I think kind of partially it started with Chusung Park, and especially with Bum Kun Cha. Now, Bum Kun Cha, when he came to Germany, everybody was watching him and said, who is this guy? What is he doing? And he became a hero. Sure. He became a hero. And when he won the UEFA Cup with Leverkusen and then also scoring the penalty for Leverkusen there, I think he made a real mark to the way the Europeans watch Korean players and football in general. You know, obviously then came the World Cup in 2002, you know, together with Japan, hosting it, going into the semifinals at the end of the day. Amazing, absolutely amazing. And that got Korean football a lot of respect in the world. But the step, and I went through similar experiences with the United States during my 5.5 years with the US, is that you gotta get your best players into the best leagues in Europe. That is the key. Now, if you look today, how many Korean players are in Europe and making their money in Europe and proving their point, if it's in the Premier League, if it's obviously Kangin in Paris, if it's a lot of them in the Bundesliga, or even other leagues now, that is the foundation for success for Korean football. And then you mix it with the K-League players. You know, the best K-League players add to it, and then you get a good mixture. And this is the recipe for, hopefully, for success and going far in the big tournaments, which are the World Cups and the Asian Cups. And that is the benchmark.
In '94, when you played against Korea, were there any particular players that stood out to you? Like, oh, this gentleman is a baller. Oh, this gentleman can actually play in Europe. Oh, this gentleman shows that Korean football is at a standard that should not be ignored.
I mean, Myung-bo he scored a goal. I mean, and obviously he played then 137 games for Korea, and played in LA in two a year, and I remember him from those days then too. But when you have players going into a World Cup, and you look at the roster, there are always players that are capable to play in Europe in good teams. I think Japan is ahead of Korea in that term, and I said that many times when I was there this year. They have an office in Düsseldorf. They travel with their staff all to the players, the clubs where they play. They talk to their coaches, to their managers, and so on. So there's a real strong support system of the federation in place, and I think that's what Korea is lagging still. They could do that better. I mentioned that a few times, but maybe it's coming. It's a process. Not coming overnight. When you say, I see something, maybe it takes a couple of years, maybe in there. But or maybe more.
This was part of the question I had for the latter stage, but now that you mentioned Düsseldorf, I wanted to kind of add it now. Since you've been a striker for so many different teams, so many different leagues, and been so successful in all of them, I always thought that there's got to be something in it and how you prepare for the game mentally, not just physically. And with these Korean players who have to travel to a different continent, completely different culture, what were the advice you can give to these players? And do you also think that we need something like the Düsseldorf office that Japan has?
I think the more you can give your players support and they feel the support, the more they feel responsible to actually give you back. So I always had the philosophy, the more I give, I can kind of pull them aside over a cup of coffee and say, hey, remember we did this. I think, you kind of should kind of turn it around now and say, okay, I gotta go to the limit. When I watched Korea in the World Cup in Qatar with Duricha, he was on my side. He was one of my coaches guiding the FIFA technical committee, basically. I said, you have pretty much everything there. Look at the quality of the players, the attitude, the hunger. But I think you lack belief. Lack belief, because, and it's very similar to the United States, what I experienced there. So when the US went in a World Cup in the round of 16, it was almost like achieving the goal. For me as a German, achieving the goal is getting in the final, And so we had different ways of looking at things, different standards, but not necessarily different qualities. You have very good players. You have players that play in Europe in the top leagues. The US too now. Look at who they have and play. So why don't you now kind of take the goal to a different level and say from the beginning on, and that's what I did with the Korean team. I said we go to Qatar to win this thing. That's our goal. Everything else is, I'm not happy with it. And so we always talked about the belief factor, the kind of the willingness to suffer to the extreme in games like the Korean team did better than the German team '94 in their game in Dallas. They were capable to take the heat far better than we did. you know, and we didn't know where it came from. We thought they have a special drink in the locker rooms. No, they camped, they fought like crazy. And again, 5 minutes longer, they would have equalized the game. But when you go into tournaments, and that's my experience over these last 40 years, it's all mental. Because you're not making a team in 2 weeks prior to a tournament physically the strongest ever. You can add a little bit of a percentage in that point. You work on the technical elements, you work on set pieces, but the mental side of the whole structure is what makes the difference, you know. And yeah, we can believe that this team can go all the way till the end and win the tournament, you know, and that's actually what they proved also. Every time, you know, we thought they're going to add another, we came back last minute and said, we did it. So the mental side is really the thing that makes a difference.
And you know, this might be a really random question, but it's honestly out of personal curiosity though, to be honest. In 2018, after the World Cup, there was a report that came out that said you were in talks with the Japanese Federation to become their national team manager. Is there any truth to that rumor?
No, no truth at all.
No talks.
But I've been quite a few times to Japan for a coaching seminar. I had friends that built their coaching system. It's called Curve Coaching. It's a teaching a module for kids and stuff like that. My son Jonathan actually, during the World Cup 2002 in Korea and Japan, went to that school, and that school was a little soccer field on top of a shopping mall, and that was pretty cool. So I traveled Japan a few times and always enjoyed it, but I've never was in talks about the national.
True, then okay, okay, that clears the air, I guess, man. Coach, I spoke with Pascal Zuberbuehler, who's a friend of yours who worked at FIFA TSG. The technical study group during the World Cup in 2022, and he told me that he always joked with you and Chaduri about you going back into coaching after the World Cup. So how did the opportunity after the World Cup come about for you to engage in talks with the KFA? What sparked that conversation for you?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, when you're part of the FIFA technical study group, you go basically, your job is going from game to game. You split in 2 groups, and each group covers half of the games. And then you analyze those games, and we worked at that time with a data team that was based in Wales, almost 100 data analysts, and we bridged basically then the gap between the data people and the football people, you know. And my task was then to translate all the data into what is relevant for football and what is not, because it's an overload on data. And when you go from game to game, you analyze the teams and you say with your group of coaches, and Duri was mostly with me all the time, said, what would you do now as a coach if you were the coach of Argentina, of Germany, of Korea, and so forth, you know? So you discuss that, and you kind of, obviously it's easier for you to judge it from the stand than for the coach on the sideline, you know, and said, well, maybe I would option now to do this, or maybe do that substitution, or maybe change the system or whatever, you know. And so we always kind of talk back and forth, what if you would do now that role? So if you would now lead Korea, or if you would now lead Brazil or Germany, who did very poorly obviously in Qatar, and so forth. So that's an ongoing discussion. Now what happened was then when Korea was out of the tournament after round of 16, you know, it happened that at a game where we went, and we always went 2 hours early to the games, and then maybe an hour before the game we sat then on our table in our stand. We walked out of the meal area in the stadium, and Mong-gyu Jung basically walked straight at me, and I talked to Mong-gyu over the years, you know, always, and he walked and said, so what's going on? So I said so literally, funny, what's going on with you guys now, you know, but not thinking about anything. I said, yeah, you know, Bento, he stepped down, and we're gonna go a new chapter. And then we just talked for 2 minutes right in the corridor and said, you want to have a coffee and share thoughts, you know? And that's what we agreed on. And the next day we had a coffee in Doha, you know, and he said, you know, that's where we're coming from as a federation now. And I told him a bit my experience that I made, you know, with federations, with clubs. And so then we agreed to stay in touch. And when the tournament is over, and then when the tournament was over, then we had a Zoom talk with him and the general secretary. And that's how then the whole thing got started.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And speaking of your assistant in Korea, Chaduri, like we talked about last time, earlier this week, he was recently appointed as the head coach of Hwasong FC, the expansion of his first head coaching job in professional football. Chaduri's role with the national team setup was on the verge of changing a little bit quite significantly after the Asian Cup. What can you tell us about Chaduri's situation as a coach at the time, and could you shed more light on that situation? Because obviously, because of what transpired towards the end of the Asian Cup and what happened afterwards, I guess things didn't really work out that way. But what were some things that you guys had in mind?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it was an absolute joy to work with Chaduri because he's a fantastic person. You know, he was a fantastic player and is also an amazing, talented coach. You know, and so the plan was simply, you know, after Asian Cup that he will take over the under-20 team, taking the under-20 team to the next World Cup. That was agreed on, you know, but verbally agreed on. You know, obviously when then things go different directions, all that was what was agreed on. You know, you can throw it in the trash can. And I felt really bad about that because I see in him a huge coaching talent. And I said many times, I said to the federation, and when I talk about the federation, I mean mainly the president, with who I had several, meetings. You know, every time I was there, and we were traveling, and I said, this should be your national team coach one day. It's absolutely, I'm totally convinced that Duri has all the qualities to become Korean national team coach at one point in time. And all he needs is experiences, you know. And so when obviously we parted ways then after the Asian Cup, you know, they pushed that topic aside as well. And Duri had to wait until now to take over a team. But he is so kind of, he has so much knowledge about the game. He looks at the game the global way, because he also obviously lived in Europe, and especially in Germany, has all the coaching licenses through the German Federation. He knows the differences between the licensing process in Korea and in Europe. So he can always pick the best from both worlds. And this is something that, you know, is very valuable. And I hope that one day he will be the national team coach of Korea.
But it's kind of hard for me to understand, Coach, from as you know, outside looking in. Him having been involved with you, with the full national team, whatever happened at the Asian Cup, if the plan was to make him the under-20 national team head coach, why do you think that never really worked out? Because I don't really see a direct correlation as to what Chaduri can do for the under-20 national team, as opposed to what happened with the senior national team, whatever happened.
Yeah, I mean, Steve, that's difficult. In their decision making, maybe they saw Duri in my boat. You know, and because I experienced the same thing with the US team with Tab Ramos, was the under-20, but he was also my staff. So the plan was also not only he takes over the under-20 Korean team, Duri, he still stays with me. So whenever the senior national team, you know, plays and I really need him, I always could, because they have a different schedule than the senior national team. So I always saw him with us then going forward into World Cup qualifying and going towards the World Cup here in the United States to gain more experience, to be always there, to bring always his knowledge and his thoughts into the equation, but also understand the other coaches. And we had a staff of coaches that was extremely experienced. I think, I don't know, I have to look a long way to see if a Korean coaching staff had these qualities that this group had, you know, with Andreas Köpke, with Andy Herzog, you know, with the fitness coach Werner Leuthardt. We basically had almost zero injuries. We were fit as hell in the Asian Cup. So Duri was part of that experience. And that's why I always see an under-20 coach, and always did, as a really strong tie to the senior team. And then he gives me the knowledge about what goes on with the younger players, who's coming up. And Duri knows every young player in Korea, 16, 17, 18, 19, because he built the academy for FC Seoul. So he knew every young player coming through the ranks. And I always ask him, you know, so is there a talent? Maybe we can call him up early just to look at him. Not necessarily give him a cap right away, but he could be part of the group going into a game, train with us. And we see that, and we had a couple of young kids coming in here and there. They just trained with us in Park Yong-woo in the training center, and I said, well, cool. And looking 3 years ahead from now, he could be the next Kangin, you know. And that's what was the goal with that role, but it didn't come then to fulfillment.
Interesting. The reason why I'm asking is the report from Der Spiegel, the German newspaper, after you left Korea, it was interpreted in several different ways in Korea as it was being re-reported, I guess. But that report mentioned that you had a virtual meeting with KFA President Chung Mong-gyu. In whatever capacity you can, could you tell us a little bit about what you guys discussed at the time and how that conversation kind of progressed over time?
Yeah, no, as I said, you know, we first met in Doha, you know, at one of the games, and then we had a coffee the next day. And then we had Zoom calls, you know, and no, it is in general, but when you have these calls as a national team coach, you talk about your staff, you talk about your coaching philosophy, you talk obviously about the quality of the team, how you look at the team and how you see the team kind of developing throughout, you know, your time then being in charge. So some is technical and some is organizational. And those are the normal talks that you have, and then, you know, you come to an agreement or not, you know. So when you talk about national teams, I think, you know, when both sides have the willingness to get together, it's really never about money. Money plays no big role in that. You know, you say, you know what, you are happy with the offer that they give you, or you're not. You're not, and that's very straightforward. And I never had, throughout my life, actually, never problems to discuss financial stuff. You know, it's really about the way of how you want to do things. You know, it's about the federation to understand who you would bring along. You know, who you see. You know, football being played. You know, how it kind of looks in your picture. But I always had the philosophy that, you know, head coach, no matter if you take a club team or a national team, needs to adjust to the qualities of the player potential that you have at your disposal. So if you have the players in a certain way, you need to shape basically a product at the end of the day that is capable to play the best football possible, you know. So I'm not a coach that says, okay, my way of playing is exactly this one, and they have to mold into this shape, you know, or into this way of playing. There are club coaches out there. They do it strictly that way. They say, you know, this is my philosophy, and you fit in there, or you gotta go. But you cannot do that. I think you cannot do it in general, because you have to work with the player potentials and their characteristics the way they are, you know. And if that team is more attacking minded, then I'm more than happy, because then I attack. But if in general their way is more defensive minded, then, you know, I have to find ways to make that work. You know, and this is a big learning curve for every coach, for every coach going into a new role, to learn, okay, this is their potential, this is their characteristics. So now I need to figure out, how do I get the most out of a young Kangini that is kind of building to become a superstar, and how do I kind of fit the best defensive way of doing things? What is the typical way of the Korean clubs and the Korean national team of playing, their shapes? And it's a learning curve. It's a learning curve.
But that's really interesting, because like on that note, I'm curious as to what you saw in Korean football and how you decided to mold your managing philosophy or footballing philosophy to maximize the best way that Korean ballers can play. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was a super interesting experience, basically. When you read players, you know, in general, it doesn't matter what your favorite team is, and you know, not only you read their technical abilities, like a Kang Lee is technically one of the best in the world and stuff, but you try to read their brains, you try to read their minds. And what I experienced the first couple of months was that somehow something's holding them back. And you got to probably explain that far better to me, because often I thought, instead of doing the first touch going towards the goal of the opponent, they do the first touch towards their own goal and not want to make mistakes. So there was a certain fear of making mistakes. So this is really interesting because in the Italian culture, for example, they will never try to it's very similar, not making mistakes. Italian coaches, a lot of them prepare the team for not losing the game.
Right.
And my culture, where I'm coming from, is I prepare the team to win the game.
That's right.
I want to win the game. I want 3 points. I don't want 1 point. Because, one win gives me 3 ties. What's the point,
sums it up,
So I saw in the first couple of experiences that, okay, it's they want go forward, but sometimes something tells them, but no, first touch, again, back, your outside positions, the first touch goes backwards. So no risk. But I tell the right back or the left back, you open up right away. Just first touch goes forward. And then I can decide. And if I don't have any way to get somewhere, then I can still cut back and play backwards or square. And so main part of my work with Korea in convincing them mentally or psychologically that they actually can do it, that they can do more, that they can score more goals. Maybe concede a few more then, when you open up a bit more. But that's part of the process. The part of the process is always that you get a couple of lessons throughout that. Life is that way. And but then after the first couple of games where we maybe risked a bit too much, with Colombia, then we had Uruguay, El Salvador came where we should have scored 7 goals, and then we lost 1-0. And because they made some mistakes attacking-wise, where they maybe should have just stepped on the ball and played square again, But that's not the point. The point is, how can I improve the team? How can I make them believe that they can do it? Because not every game you will just be even 0-0. Right. Sometimes you lose 1-0, you lose 2-1, or even 2-0. Got to figure out a way to come back, And I think that was the whole learning curve over the year of work, was that they started to understand that approach to, we want to win the game at all costs, we are not coming in now and we want to tie. Tie is okay, nobody can attack us, In the Italian culture, with a tie, you always be left alone. Meaning in a good way, nobody will bother you.
Job done.
Yeah, job done,
Right.
For me, I don't know. I cannot. Ties is not job done. It's I want to win the game. So we build that belief more and more. And when you then go into a tournament, and especially when you get out of the group stage of a tournament, it's all about belief. It's all about belief. So now, do you believe now in a World Cup that the round of 16 is kind of goal accomplished? Or do you believe that, no, I want to go to the semi-final, the Final Four at least. The Final Four is my goal. And for us, the goal was clear, defined. And I repeated that in every press conference. And said, the goal is win the Asian Cup. But you can always correct me if you see it differently, or how you would have seen it. But that was just my learning experience, and over that year.
So, your holistic approach, your philosophy as a football mind, that was directly presented to President Chung Mong-gyu. Could I say, would it be correct to say that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I said to Mong-gyu in the beginning on, I said, I really believe that you can go far with this team. I think, you have a good mixture of K-League players and the European-based players. You have more and more going to Europe, challenge themselves, which is great. Now it's literally about goal setting and going for it. Going for it with 200 miles an hour. You gotta go for it, and you have to build that belief. And it's in many other countries, which I experienced over the last decades. It's very similar. You take top competitions in South America, for example. You take Colombia, you take Ecuador, or Paraguay, and you look at the talent pool of the players, they're also similar to Korea and Japan. Very, very good. But still, they do not get into the Final Four. At the Final Four, it's always Argentina, Brazil then, I think Uruguay probably gets the closest of those ones, because they are warriors like Korea actually. They are fighters, they're fighters, they are, and it's really interesting, my learning experience over these decades, living in different countries and traveling the world, is that every team's characteristics go deep into the cultural elements of
yeah,
your country.
Absolutely.
You know, so Uruguay is kind of locked in between Brazil and Argentina, and always had to bring out the elbows to fight them off because they wanted to swallow the country, right?
Right.
So very similar, no, to Korea. Very similar.
Similar history, yep.
Yeah, and so that plays a role. Or Germany, you know, was always something happened big when Germany was in a certain moment of its history. The World Cup team that won 54 was the first team that allowed us Germans, and my father told me that, to kind of walk out tall again. You know, because obviously we were the enemy of everybody in the world because of what happened in World War II. Understandably. Then 74 team happened to a very precise time when there was the global oil crisis, 2 years after the attack on the Israeli athletes in the Munich Olympics, and this was a turmoil. And then came Beckenbauer with his team and just kind of won this World Cup, you know. And my team, 1990, was the team of the reunification.
Right.
So we kind of suddenly, we were allowed to go to Italy to represent the two German sides. And my father comes from East Germany, and he ran away after World War II and met my mom on the western side, so that's why I grew up in the western side. But his entire family lived on the eastern side. Wow. So I always went back and forth between East Germany and West Germany until the wall came down. So I felt always this, oh, maybe one day it has to become one country again.
Right.
So every team that represented a specific World Cup cycle has its characteristics deeply in the cultural moment of that country. You know, and what I've observed with Argentina was over the decades since '86, since they won the last World Cup, is how can Messi not win this damn World Cup?
Right.
You know, it's not possible. He's the best player in the world, and so on. 2018, 17. I went to go to Argentina because it was on my bucket list, was Boca Juniors play, River Plate.
Right, yeah.
And with two friends of mine. And so we did a boys trip, you know, and I went to that game, and the tension before that game between these two rivals, on the expectations of the Boca Junior fans that had their home advantage, I never felt so much tension in my life before. And I talked, and the coach of Boca Juniors was Guillermo Barros Piccolotto, who became the coach of the LA Galaxy.
Right.
And I asked him then, I said, how do you approach it? And he said to me, Jürgen, we try to bring them down from a tension level because it's far beyond of controllable. The game was played, and I said, when both teams came on the field, it was such a pressure element in the stadium. I said to my two buddies, I said, they're not going to win this game. It's too much. And they lost the game 2-1 against River Plate, and but they won then the championship at the end of the day. But now I said, now I understand what Messi must face when he comes to Argentina. Every time he comes to Argentina, the people tell him in his face, you have to bring us a World Cup. Because if you don't bring us a World Cup, you will never be measured on Maradona. Maradona will be always God for the Argentinians. And that's what I understood. So when we were then together in Qatar with Chadori, and we watched Argentina, you could feel that. The expectations from all the Argentinian fans were clearly, bring us home this World Cup. And then they lose the first game against Saudi Arabia. And which is always doable in a World Cup. You lose against teams where you think you're the big favorite, but they can play too. So nobody underestimates anybody. You first have to play the game. Like Germany played Japan, lost against Japan. And Japan sent home Germany. So this is all doable in every competition. And then came game 2 for Argentina, and you could feel the nervousness of Argentina. If we don't beat Mexico now, shit, you know, maybe we go out in the group stage. Imagine that. And then it was basically Messi kind of in the second half, 0-0 still. He released that shot in the bottom left of the goal, and suddenly all the tension fell off. And then they played their game, and they went from game to game to game until they won the World Cup. So that's where you can see that the national team of every country is a reflection of its own country and the people, young and old, you know, female, male, doesn't matter. Everybody looks at it differently, and that's I think the beauty of football is that you experience basically your own country kind of in your own way.
Yes, definitely.
I think we would all agree that like culturally and historically these things kind of affect our games. From your standpoint, what would you do to remedy these intense mental pressure? Like I know that you were really into meditating before the game. Do you think those kind of things would help?
No, I'm not now somebody that preaches meditation. I think it could be one of the elements that maybe help player 1, 2, 3. But doesn't help the other players, you know, or you have to buy into. But I think you need to offer the generation of players today different ways of dealing with mental kind of issues, you know. So I introduced the German team in 2004 a sports psychologist, and I said to the players, listen, use him or don't use him. It's totally up to you. I think that the athlete himself needs to decide what is good for him, what helps him, you know, in a psychological approach of big moments, big pressure situations, and whatnot. It could be meditation, it could be a person to talk to, it could be family, but obviously the game evolves, you know, sports evolves. Professional sport is different to 20 and 30 years ago, you know, so now you see top athletes, some of them have their own physiotherapist, some of them have, and it's not only that they bring their hairdresser with, it's a completely different picture than we had in '94. You know, nobody was allowed to get into the inner circle of the team. Now you got to negotiate with the team captain and saying, can you bring their own massage therapist, or can you bring your other people in, or you want to see your agent in a hotel? And you say, you know, that's the way of how things are going now. And then you have to let go as a coach and says, it's all right, you know, do what is best for you, as long as you train 1,000% and you're ready for the game.
Whatever works for the player.
Whatever works for the player, yeah.
Coach, I'm going to bring you back to the topic of Korea. As you were going through the process of being appointed as the national team head coach for Korea, did you also have a chance to speak with the technical committee? And how relatively was it a quick process for you to become the Korean national team manager?
It was a couple of conversations by Zoom, nothing complicated. The process was a few weeks, you know, and then you came to the conclusion, let's give it a try, yeah.
Coach, the reason why I'm asking you this is the report from Der Spiegel, when it was being interpreted through the Korean media, there was a suggestion in the Korean media saying that the conversation with you and the KFA kind of started as a joke. And I kind of find, like, outside looking in, I find that hard to believe. I mean, considering the career that you've had in football, that something would start out as a joke and lead to something like this. Like, could you shed a little more light?
No, I don't think that. No, if that was kind of understood that way, then it was wrongly taken. I think maybe that report wanted to make it. It's like a bit funny the way, you know, you bump into a president of a federation at a game in Qatar, you know, you go to one way, he goes the other way, and then you say, let's meet for coffee the next day. Maybe it's like a bit funny how this kind of starts, but this is, so it was never meant to be a joke.
Sure.
But I think, you know, football is really, funny also in a certain way, because things happen overnight, you know, often. And I had these experiences, like when I took Germany, for example, in 2004, my former coach was traveling through California with his, at that time, little son, and stopped by for barbecue. And Germany just got into a totally different, a change of coaching situation, because Rudi Völler, my former teammate, resigned. And then they asked two coaches, it was Hitzfeld and Rehagel at that time, to take over, and both said no. The one said the team is not good enough, and the other said he wants to stay with Greece because he won the European Championship.
Yeah.
And then he says to me, basically sitting on my balcony, why would you be interested in doing it? And I said, Coach, I said, no, let's not have, you know, let's not make a joke, you know. And he says, no, but seriously, you got the coaching license, you did everything, you live here since obviously 6 years in the US, and you look at things differently, maybe that would be good for the German Federation. And he says, let me call the president of the federation real quick, you know. And next day I got a call from the federation and said, oh, can we meet? And I said then, yeah, but I'm not flying to Frankfurt for a cup of coffee, you know.
Yeah.
And I said, no, then let's meet halfway. So we met 2 days later in New York. And then I prepared myself, you know, with some notes and said, you know, okay, if that's really something serious you want to talk about, I mean, I learned a lot of different ways, approaches here in the US throughout my last 6 years, and maybe I can bring these elements with to the German Federation, and if you're open to it. So then they said, what does it mean? I said, mental approach, so psychologist, about, you know, fitness. You know, I met here totally different approaches to fitness training through the NFL and the NBA. I visited, you know, Phil Jackson. I visited Pete Carroll. I sat down with Billy Bean from the Oakland A. So I learned about data usage and all that stuff. And that was in 2004, the conversation.
Right.
But I used all these years just to learn, you know. So I said to the president of the federation, the German Federation, and in New York, I said, listen, it's very simple. If you consider me, which is an honor, you consider me, but you have to do it then in a different way. Because if you do it the old way, nothing will change.
Right.
I'm not coming to do it your way. I'm coming to do it a different way. I'm not saying it will be successful, but I will at least give it a try. And if you think then it's after a certain time in the process, it's not going to work out, don't have bad feelings. You know, my home is LA, and I will be always a home here, and we'll figure it out. So that's how I coached in Germany for 2 years. I flew back and forth 42 times between Germany and LA.
But this was all agreed upon.
Yeah, no, it's all agreed. But the point was to improve the program with the most knowledge you can get from whatever world you pick that knowledge, and that's what we did. And yeah, it was fascinating, and it ended then in the 2006 World Cup that we almost won. You know, we lost to Italy in semifinal, but most importantly, all the changes that we did in these 2 years were then afterwards implemented by then all the leagues in Europe. Pretty much all the leagues, not only the Bundesliga that started then to have the fitness coaches being educated in the US by athletes' performance, bringing in mental people into their approach, you know, dealing with athletes, rebuilding the whole scouting process of database and scouting process of I'm scouting the next new player, the next Messi or the next Kang In Lee, or we actually have a separate department preparing us for the next opponent. So those are two different scouting departments which I introduced into Bayern Munich 2 years later, and all these things. So it's a constant learning approach, and that's what, you know, these conversations are about when you talk a couple of times before you then actually be named national team coach, that you make sure that, you know, they understand where you're coming from, and I try to understand where they're coming from.
So that's where I'm actually curious, because in the same way that you had that conversation in 2004, I was wondering, can you go into some detail about where you saw eye to eye with Chung Mong-gyu when you were talking about potentially becoming our national team's head coach?
Yeah, my question to them was always, why are you where you are right now? You know, what limits you not going further? Was my question, you know, saying you have majority of the players now in Europe, you know, that process is in full go, not as advanced as the Japanese side, but it's great. You have a lot of good players in Europe.
That's the right question.
Now, where does your league stand? You know, K-League, which I went in and watched a lot of K-League games, but a similar kind of situation to MLS here in the United States. And so it's kind of both sides learn from each other, you know, and have that exchange of ideas, opinions, but the end goal is obviously the World Cup, where you want to go as far as you can. But what is the definition of that end goal? You know, where I came in and said, you know, based on what I see, with my experience, my way of looking at things is, you should call it the Final Four. You should go out big. You should go out and say, let's give it a shot. And if you get knocked out in the round of 16 or the quarterfinals, so be it. You know, it could be still that it was a fantastic run until that point, and you made everybody in Korea happy with the way the team played. Then it's cool.
So
right?
you saw eye to eye on ambition.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah.
The end all be all.
Yeah, that's what was my take on it. You know, otherwise, why would I come?
Right.
You know.
And were there other demands from you that maybe you asked for, maybe conditions that you asked for, and if there were the promises kept?
No, the promises were kept. Fantastic. I mean, that's why I'm so proud also looking back at that year of work. You know, the KFA did pretty much everything that I could wished for, you know, and the process that we went into, you know, was a huge learning curve. There's not everything, you know, kind of gold that shines, you know, in no place in the world. You know, I remember between the first two games, Colombia and Uruguay, you know, they suddenly announced that a board was forgiven for corruption, match fixing years before, right before our game, and against Uruguay.
Right.
And the game against Colombia, my first game with the team, was fantastic.
Excellent game.
It was a super game. And suddenly I saw all the energy dropping, you know, below the table. I said, what's happened? So I asked Chadori, obviously, I asked the people who live there, what's happening? What just happened, you know? And I said, yeah, they just announced that they forgive these people for what they did. And I felt like, why do you do this now on the day of the game?
Yeah. Right.
And then I saw that the team was shaking.
Mm-hmm.
All that affected the players.
Absolutely, because they obviously live it. I don't live.
Read it. They
I can
watch
read it.
right.
They watch it. They have their opinion,
Yeah.
and they get asked by the media about it, and so suddenly it got a whole turmoil, and then we lose the game because we kind of were not into the game the first 15 minutes when they scored 2 goals.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got into the game and then played actually a fantastic second half. Fantastic second, where we actually equalized the game.
Right.
And then for a VAR decision like this, you know, they didn't give the goal. You know, but it's all part of learning. You know, in the next games too, part of learning. And then suddenly, I would say, from September on, we saw this thing going really the right direction. And then the games, and until the semi-final, then in the Asian Cup, we were 13 games unbeaten. And I said, we're going to win this thing.
Coach, you've held different types of positions. You've been a national team manager in Europe. You've been a club manager in Europe. You've been a national team manager in the CONCACAF and also in the AFC with Korea for a year. Were there anything that you noticed from the Korean footballers, on and off the pitch, or on or off the pitch? You know, anything different from players that you've worked with in the past in Europe or even the US? The psychology of players, maybe?
I think what is different, especially for the top players, the top Korean players, is the way they are being looked at by their own people. So I've never seen, like in Korea, that the top players like Sonny, Kang In Lee, or Kim In Jae, that they almost looked like pop stars by the fans in Korea. I've never experienced it before. So when I then at the games, so it's a really, it's one side is enjoyable side because a lot of young people coming to the games. On the other side, I kind of questions: are they really there for the game, for the football game, or are they there to admire their heroes? You know.
Yes.
And so when I was in the stadium and I looked back, you know, behind my bench and stuff like that, and I saw probably 80% of teenage girls, which is amazing. It's amazing, but are they reading the game? You know, and suddenly during the game, suddenly there comes a big noise. Wow! But there was just a normal pass on the field from A to B, and then I look up on the big screen. Oh, they just showed Sonny or Kangin
on the screen.
On the screen. So I've never seen that kind of relationship between a fan and a top player in this kind of extreme. Also at the hotels, they were waiting in front of the hotels. Really super nice and admirable, but it's somehow not football related.
Right.
And that makes it curious because that type of atmosphere is obviously very exclusive to Korea almost. But for the top players, like you mentioned, Sonny, Lee Gang-in, guys that play in Europe, like Kim Min-jae, do you feel like the way the crowd reacts in games in Korea, do you think that affects their performance as opposed to the way they play in Europe?
I think it affects a little bit their way of thinking when they go into games, you know, especially now friendly games. You know, I don't think in qualifying games, in competitive games, I think they're really locked into their job. But I saw it in a couple of friendly games that players were tempted to kind of show off a little bit,
Showcase their abilities.
Showcase,
yeah,
you know.
showcase
I
their
had to
abilities,
tell
right.
Kangin, hey,
Right.
1-2 touches and then pass, you know. And then when you want to dribble in the box or close to the goal, dribble, do your thing. But in the process of getting the ball from the back into the front lines, play it simple, 1-2 touch, because if you touch it 3 times, all the spaces are closed. We don't find a play anymore in the front. And he understood after a couple of times, but I had to remind him. And I think it is kind of tempting for the players to have this little bit of show off then,
Such a
because
concert sort of atmosphere there,
Yeah.
right? K-pop
Yeah.
concert. Yeah.
But on the other side, I said I really kind of admired that too. You know? So one time, I think I was after the first 2 games against Colombia and Uruguay and Seoul. It was really kind of cool when you left in the stadium. You saw these thousands of fans waiting for Sonny and Kangin and these guys, and I said, this is different. It's different. It's different. Yeah.
As a player, coach, you as a player, you seem to have been a footballer with a lot of curiosity. I mean, you went abroad at a time when it wasn't very easy for players to go abroad in that era. But looking back on your personality as a footballer during your playing career, did you notice similar ambitions when you were working with some of the Korean players, or were they a little bit different about their ambitions and their respective careers?
No, I think there is a very curious element in many Korean players that I experienced from the beginning on, asking, how would it be if I go to Europe? Especially K-League players They came to me and asked, is there any chance maybe for me to get to Europe? Or
So they came to you?
Yeah, and they ask questions about what it would be a good league, so they can talk to their agent, and I really liked that. I enjoyed that, that they had this goal. I want to prove myself in Europe. Some obviously also go to Japan, for example. And no, I think this was really cool.
And speaking of which, were there any players in particular that you kept a very special bond with? Maybe somebody that you still keep in touch with, or somebody that you really enjoyed working with? Any particular player in mind?
No, I think I enjoyed working with all of them. I take the players the way they are, and I would never expect somebody to be exactly the way I want him to be. That's not me. I like different characters. I like also difficult characters here and there. I like to have conversations where it's different opinions, and different approaches. I saw that in many Korean players, they're very kind of disciplined in the way they also respond. Maybe it's sometimes not what they really think. They say it because they are taught to just obey in a certain way, and I think that's something where I wish sometimes they would have come even more out of themselves, and put down your point. One of my most interesting learning curves I went through that year with Korea was certainly when people explained to me, not players or people just that work with you, that they are kind of hierarchy topics always being part of the Korean culture, young and old, which eventually led then basically to me being let go because a younger player disobeyed the older player, and it turned out to be a real fight. And that basically killed our chance to win the Asian Cup. But then to learn about it, to learn what causes these tensions, what causes these moments, was for me super interesting.
You mentioned how a lot of the players now get like a pop star treatment in Korea. I feel like that's been like the case in recent, say, 8
years?
Yeah, 7, 8 years.
Decade or so. Yeah.
So, but there's a discrepancy between certain players getting more pop star treatment than the other players. Based on your experience with these Korean players, were there any Korean players that you thought were lesser known but had that potential to be great?
Well, you always look for the next generation of players, young players. I mean, certainly one was Young-woo, Seoul, that came through the ranks, and I talked to Myung-bo. He coached Ulsan at that time, and we both kind of paved his way. where I saw, a player that, he could easily play in Europe, talent-wise,
Now he
right
does.
right away. Now he does. The team where he's now, the team manager, Marco Marin, is German and came to Qatar to the tournament, came to visit me and asked me about him, and I said, you can take that player blindly. He will deliver. He can play left or right, probably a little bit better on the right because he's right-footed, and has also the right mindset to become a very, very good player.
Coach, this recommending players to Europe, right? Is that a role that you actively played during your time in Korea? Because you were traveling around in Europe, meeting different clubs, managers, directors. Is that a role that you were kind of actively playing?
You are not meant to play that actively, but you automatically play it actively. So it's not part of your job, no. But it's automatically you are in that role because I'm in that world since 40 years, and I know so many coaches, so many sporting directors of clubs, and obviously national team coaches all over. And I was on the FIFA board. I'm on the UEFA board with 25 coaches from Zidane to Figo to Southgate and so many coaches. So you are part of a network that constantly talks to each other. And so when you then deal with a national team, and this is your roster now, you have maybe 30 really special players, that is noticed, to all the other coaches. So when they have now, if it's a club like Marco Marin with Red Star Belgrade, they come to me, they call me or text me and say, hey, no, we are looking at that player, what do you think about it? They get my honest opinion. So the same role I had with the US, many calls from European coaches about US players, and more then made the jump over without me kind of doing anything actively in that. I felt afterwards, when kind of a lot of critics kind of were thrown at me in February, March, that he wasn't doing enough for the Korean football situation because he was with FIFA, he was with UEFA, he was doing ESPN work. I think, it kind of turned into a negative, which should have been, and I see it still today as a total positive of a coaching role. So I always say part of the Korean media made it a very negative, that I was meeting with FIFA, that I'm meeting with these top 25 European coaches at UEFA, that I was representing Korean football, doing ESPN work, by Zoom from my home, and talking about Sonny and Kang-in and Kim Min-jae, which I feel like it is like selling Korean football to the world. So I thought this is something they should appreciate, right? But part of the Korean media took it kind of the other way. And I realized that, and then they came up with the topic, he's not enough in the country. And I said, do you have any idea how much I am in Korea? My wife really barely saw me. I was in Korea, then I was in Malaysia, then I was watching opponents, then I went to Europe and I visited Sonny at Tottenham, Kim Min-jae at Napoli, in Mainz, Jae-sung, I went to Freiburg and all that. And no, the Korean part of the Korean media, which you know better than I do, part of the Korean media turned it into a negative. And I said, how can that be a negative if I'm looking after my players there? Oh no, when I'm in Europe, they say I should watch the younger players in the K-League. Yeah, but I knew all the younger players in the K-League, and I went to all the K-League games with Duri. So I realized after time, no matter what you do, they turn it into negative. And then I touched base actually with a couple of former Korean coaches. And I said to them, did they do the same thing with you guys? And I'm not naming now names because I don't want to put them. And they said, yeah, they did the same with me. And only because at the end, maybe it turned into a success with the tournament, they said, great job. But until that point, constantly negativity.
Right.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Coach, I really want to ask more details about what happened on the eve of the Jordan semifinal. But before I go there, I kind of wanted to take a step back. And you said earlier that you were a gentleman that loves having conversations of differing opinions. So I'm gonna go there if that's all right. And then if I say something crazy, please tell me to take a step back, you know? But, you know, I'm dying to ask some questions because when we fought against Saudi Arabia and in Australia and the way that we won, it added years to my life. And I have to thank you for adding years to my life, for letting us, you know, have those type of games, you know?
Does he
to
look
do
so
those
much
games.
older now?
He actually does. Yeah.
But
No doubt.
what I will say as well is that we play Saudi Arabia, played Australia. They're massive teams in our confederation. And I know that we were playing against Jordan next. I was not confident going into that game. We played against Jordan in the group stages, and we were fighting for our lives, just like how we were fighting for our lives against Malaysia.
Yeah.
And that's an insane red flag because contextually speaking, with Malaysia, they were about 100 odd rankings below us, and they scored 3 against us. I'm scared, coach. You know what I mean? So then we play against Jordan in the semifinal. Performance that I've seen up to that point don't really make me feel like we control the games. We have moments of individual brilliance that help us score goals, but we're leaky in the back, and sometimes it looks like we can land a plane in our midfield. And I think that was epitomized.
That's a good one. I like that one.
That's just how I
Land a
felt.
plane in midfield.
Yeah, you know, like for Jordan's second goal, when Hwang In-bum was stripped of the ball, he tries to recover, but he can't. But he's also been playing every single minute of every single game in that tournament. That makes me question rotation, right? Like keeping players fresh as you run through a tournament. Park Yong-woo also looked isolated many a times. And in fact, it was because he was isolated so many times that he got so much flack back in Korea. Generally speaking, I'm just like, coach, you gotta talk to me here because after that Jordan game, it was tough, you know? And that was our moment. You said it yourself, like, yeah, that fight really took the wind out of our sails, but you said we can win this, you know?
Yep.
And sometimes I wonder if there was more, tactical aptitude is a bit harsh, but if I feel like I saw something more than just our fighting spirit, which is very typically Korean football. I feel like even maybe after a bust up, we can rely on genuine tactics that have taken us as far as we have. But because we were relying on individual brilliance, after we lose our morale, the team is gone. So can you talk a little bit about what I said? It was a lot, so whatever you want to talk
was a
about.
lot.
Yeah, my fault, coach, my fault.
No,
I don't want to step on the
cool.
toes.
I learned something new. Awesome.
Playing on the field.
Yeah. No, I mean, totally right. You know, when you go through the group stage, you know, you kind of do not know what to expect, you know. And the way Arabic teams play, especially Jordan and Bahrain, you know, was a huge learning curve for us coaches. You know, time wasting from the goalkeeper. It's the first game, Bahrain, 15 minutes time wasting, you know. Suddenly you go into stoppage time, 14, 16 minutes, you know. And very physical. So they play basically at home because you play in an Arabic nation.
Yes.
So learning curve, next one was East Asian teams are not really welcomed there. In a way to play the games, you know. I'm not saying, you know, soccer-wise, you know,
Asian
football.
heritage,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So that was super interesting, you know. Tactical points well taken because you always think, you know, should have approached this way or that way. Yeah. You can always have this discussion after games, you know.
Sure.
Malaysia was a very particular game because in Malaysia, one penalty given was not a penalty, you know. And another incident led to the second goal was a clear foul. And then the third goal came, and it was by that, you know, it should have ended 3-0. They said that in the press conference after the game. Their equalizer happened in the 16th minute of stoppage time, and they only announced 12 minutes. So they played as long as they get another chance to score. No, but nevertheless, you should beat them. Totally agree. Totally. You should have the expectation as Korea to go into a Asian Cup game against Malaysia and beat them. But it's never easy in the first place. So the learning curve of a team going through group stage is like you got to get the job done in the group stage no matter what is the approach of all teams getting, if it's Japan or if it's Saudi Arabia as a favorite or Australia or whoever are the bigger nations in Asia, so-called bigger nations, you know. Get the job done and then a whole new chapter starts. So once you go then into the knockout phase, you prepare differently. You prepare for 120-minute games, you prepare for penalties, and so you time then all these elements in training towards those situations. I would say we were the fittest team
Definitely.
in the Asian Cup.
Definitely.
We had basically, except early injuries that had nothing to do actually with the tournament itself, was Ichan had a problem, and in Shinsu, the left back, him had a problem. But they didn't come from us in the training camp. They brought those injuries with them. So we never had injuries. So we trained on the limit, but always that we are ready for 120 minutes. That gave us the confidence to say we stick mainly to the players and not getting rotational. We want to have a flow in the game. We help also a player that had a bad game to get confirmed for the next game and not letting him drop. We could have said, okay, this guy had a bad game, so now let's play the next guy. No, we said, no, we want to, step by step, we want to have a flow of our starting lineup, and have them, with every game, improve their understanding for each other. Which got confirmed then going through Saudi Arabia, penalty shootouts, then Australia, extra time. But in a way that they were molding, they were finding each other. Not perfectly. No, absolutely, you were right. There were some performances where I say, I could have taken that guy or that guy into consideration. But we felt like, no, that it's okay. And when you have a player, when you feel, okay, he's getting tired, then you have, as a coach, you have the discussion now, okay. So many coaches say that I bring in fresh legs, or many commentators say that.
Sure.
He brings in these players for getting fresh legs on the field.
Sure.
I have more a different approach in ways of, I rather have the guy that I give the confidence to get the job done, go through a tired moment in the game, and he scores me the final penalty or maybe the final goal, even if he's tired, instead of not having him anymore on the field, and the other guy gets his minutes in, gets his time, but he is not the difference maker. So I keep Ijan on the field, where I should maybe take him off, or certain players maybe giving some rest, because maybe he decides the game for me. Right. That's why I give you an example. At the European Championship final, when Southgate took out Harry Kane, I was really disappointed as a fan. Because I said, well, even if he doesn't have a good game right now, he scores maybe the final penalty, or the header in the 92nd minute. And that's why the key players that I define as key players don't necessarily want to change, as long as they are not injured or have something like that. But it's well taken. So until that point, we got really confirmed then the game against Saudi Arabia and the game against Australia that we're on the right path. That's how we felt, at least.
Got it.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I'll just add this one and then
Landing
Park
a plane
Yong-woo.
in midfield, love it. I got that one now.
The defensive midfielder Park Yong-woo, you remember him, right? So during the Asian Cup, you employed Park Yong-woo as central defensive midfielder a lot, and you used him as like if I remember correctly, more like a sole defensive midfielder. He seemed to struggle in my eyes a little bit, not just in Asian Cup, but even right before the Asian Cup against Iraq. I felt like he struggled just a little bit defensively, to a point that after the preliminaries, I felt like he may need to be like mentally helped a little bit, because he felt like traumatized at times.
Yeah, it seemed a little shaky from the way we saw it. Yeah.
You just mentioned how you're not going to drop a player because that player had one bad game. But in his case, I felt like maybe just more than one bad. So, but you still used him again in the semifinals against Jordan. What did you see in him that made you still want to use him?
I saw in him a player that constantly wants to improve and do better from game to game, even if he has a bad game. I saw that is his first tournament. You could see he's nervous. And with the Iraq kind of game before the tournament, yes, you feel that too. Yeah. But then you look at the overall shape of the team, and you look what alternatives you have in your squad. We coaches felt like he gets the job done, even if he has a bad game or two bad games.
Because he has the natural ability. Right?
He has the natural abilities.
Albert, you got something, man?
Yes, Coach. There was a lot of talk about the defensive setup, right? And obviously Kim Min-jae is your undisputed starter, but on his right or left side, Kim Young-gun was getting older. A lot of options at center back, and I think you went with Chung Seung-hyun as the main partner. What did you see in Chung, qualities that made you think he was good enough to play alongside Min-jae? Because Min-jae, obviously, I think if you agree, he blows the other partners out of the water.
Yeah.
What made Seung-hyun the ideal fit alongside Min-jae in central defense?
No, we felt in the choice we made them, we felt like, this is the best fit for each other. Because I learned there very quickly that for, obviously, Min-jae undoubtedly is the defender in Asia, the best by far, and one of the best in the world, as I always said. He needs to feel comfortable. So I had several talks with Min-jae. Min-jae always said, I feel comfortable with everybody, but I can read between the lines.
Right.
And so the choices that we made, we felt like, okay, they really are the perfect fit in that moment, even if we can go with a plan B or a plan C in this way. The outside positions were always discussed for us, but every coaching staff goes basically through these discussions and decision-making processes the way that they hope that this is the ideal puzzle put together. It will never fit 100%. You will always have, maybe a left back has a bad day or the number 6 role has a bad day, and then you say, okay, what can we change, how can we change? Maybe instead of a number 6, we do 2 number 8s, for example, or we go, instead of 3 forwards, we go with 2, we switch system there. But then at the end of the day, it's the players really that define all those things. The players define your system. When you have Kang-in Lee on the field, it's a different game. Then you need to find a role for him where he can be effective for us, that he is there where goals happen, that he can maybe take a shot off or the decisive pass, and how does it fit best with Sonny? And if that's the case, then where does Lee-jun fit the most? And then I have Jae-sung, playing actually really well too, very consistent always. He gives you everything he has. And then those discussions that they take place every day in the coaches' office, with the players too, especially with the captain, with Sonny. We talk through that and say what is the best, because you are just part of the puzzle as well. Your coaching staff is part of that whole bigger picture too, just to make sure that you fit and you agree. Sometimes you don't agree, but then you have to make the decisions.
Coach, was the reason behind the famous fight? Is that something that you're struggling to understand, at least from a cultural standpoint? Was it shocking to you that something like that happened on the eve of the game?
Yeah, it was a huge shock for us European coaches. I have to say, yeah, it was something we never experienced. But I mean, it can always happen. A fight can always break out. Also between teammates. Obviously between opponents on the field, we saw it all.
Was this something that was discussed, and what was the KFA's response when that was brought up? And do you think that's something that the federation could have done more to kind of navigate, to alleviate the tension a little bit?
No, actually the federation stayed completely out of that situation. I mean, the president was there was in the hotel with us. He was not there at the incident, but he was with us staying. But we just tried, all of us try to focus on the game against Jordan, and just kind of talk about the situation and calm things down, balancing it out, find the spirit again that went out of the window with that fight.
Do you feel like, I mean, it's all said and done now, but do you feel like the fight was preventable at all? Because you hear all kinds of stories about how coaches manage their teams. They would have a set meal time where nobody leaves the dining area or anything like that. Do you think there was anything that anybody could have done to prevent this fight from happening?
I don't think so. I mean, we didn't see any tension in training sessions. Actually, the team was on such a good spirit. I mean, we were just in a good mood. We just beat Australia in extra time. Before that, in penalty shootout, we beat Saudi Arabia. The atmosphere was brilliant. It was really good. And I told the players, this cup is there for you to take it. So if we would have seen something, or even, Korean people per se that maybe sees it far earlier than European coaches, then we would have done something about it, or at least talked about it. But we didn't see anything like that coming up.
Right. And I mean, we kind of talked about it a little bit, but did you have a chance to speak with multiple players about it afterwards at all? And how did that conversation really go with them?
Oh no, we talked obviously to the two of them, separately and together, and it's all understood. I mean, it was just a reaction that happened, and then you really just try to kind of get them refocused on what is really, really important. And important was the semifinal win against Jordan.
Right.
That was the important thing. And so you put all your energy and all your information and your words towards the opponent, towards the game, and once the game was played and we obviously lost it, then you understand that it was just not fixable so quickly, what happened there the night before. Which is sad because I would have wished for the players and for Korea as a country to win this Asian Cup.
Sure. And you've said several times that still going to the semifinal of that tournament, it's still a success for the team in terms of your overall evaluation of the tournament. Could you talk a little bit about some positives that Korea can take from that Asian Cup?
I think there were a lot of positives, that obviously were put into the background then overall. Getting in a Final Four of any big tournament, if it's an Asian Cup, a Copa America, a European Championship, is a success. And especially in a difficult environment like in an Arabic nation, which is traditionally, historically very difficult for East Asian teams to compete in. For that, I think we made a lot of people proud, and that's what I experienced. I went back with the team to Seoul, and for a couple of days I was still there, waiting then for the federation to come up with a meeting or not, and then they said, no, you can fly back to California. But these couple of days, wherever I went, I walked always throughout the city, people hugged me, came and thanked me for, this was the most exciting Asian Cup, in a long time, and so I really felt like we did a good job. We did a really, really special job. But I also had the feeling then, and I understood it when we arrived from Qatar in Seoul, that part of the media is extremely negative on us coaches, and very aggressively. And that's where I thought, whoa, this is a bit of an extreme, that I'm not used to. At least you have a football discussion, whatever, about tactics, about elements in the game. Why would you have played this guy or that guy, but this was personal. They kind of went at me like personal and bringing all sorts of topics up that had nothing to do with the tournament and the outcome of the tournament. So I thought, wow, this is a bit new. So you see a different face, of
So you've never experienced anything like that?
Of parts of the Korean. No, the whole year there was a part of the Korean sports media. They were always critical with me, and then I touched base with some former coaches of Korea as well, and they told me the same story. They were just offended for the whole time, and then based on the end result, they were kind of, get compliments or not, But I think looking at that experience, it was a very positive experience. I mean, we were, until that Jordan game, 13 games unbeaten.
Yeah.
Some spectacular games within, not all perfect by no means, like the Malaysia one or Bahrain in the beginning, totally fine. But I thought this team is growing. This team is growing. There's some younger players growing in that team. There's a lot of good things on the horizon to be happen. And obviously the big goal is the World Cup in the US, in Mexico and Canada. And I think the foundation of the team is there to do really well. Yeah.
One thing that obviously blew up into a big controversy was your location of residency during your time with Korea. I mean, ironically enough, we're seeing coaches like Mauricio Pochettino working from London, managing the U.S. national team. And we're also talking about Thomas Tuchel, maybe sometimes being in Germany, working as the England national team head coach. Was it a frustration for you that this became such a big public controversy that the Korean public had difficulty understanding this?
I felt from the beginning on when they brought this, I was a lot in Korea. I spent a lot of time in Seoul and all over the country watching K-League games, K2 League games, college games, youth games. So I had a very, very good understanding of how things work in Korea, and I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it going throughout the country. I took classes twice a week usually there, Korean class. Can read the alphabet now, not obviously understanding the words then. And I felt really, really good about it. But I also felt that only parts of the media made that a topic, always driving it into negativity. It was a standard question in every press conference. Oh, when are you going back home? Oh, where are you going next? Oh, what's your schedule the next 2 weeks? And I kind of then responded nicely, but also sometimes directly saying, listen, I'm not asking you where you're going to be the next 2 weeks. I responded those questions as politely as I could, but then also making it clear, listen, you're not telling me how to do my job, you know? So if you want somebody in place that does the job exactly like you want it, I don't know, maybe it's the traditional Korean way, why are you hiring then a foreign coach? Why are you hiring me with my background in what I did, you know? And I coached Germany, going back and forth between the US and Germany for 2 years. Always constantly getting new impulses from different people and learning from different situations. If you wanted to do it just the purely Korean way, you hired the wrong person.
Right.
Yeah, and I know it from the previous coaches, they had the same story as well. And so I thought, okay, sooner or later it will die down, depending on the results.
Right.
You know, and I'm sure that if you would have won the Asian Cup, you know, they would have said, no, you can do now whatever you want to. But it gave it a little bit of a negativity to it, because it was constantly repeated. You know, after every game, the first question was, so what are you doing next? You know, how long are you staying in Seoul? And when I was in Seoul, I had basically nothing to do. You know, it was not that I was going to coaching seminars and doing, I did that in the beginning, or they had specific things set up like interviews or something like that. No, there was literally no agenda to it. So then I said, okay, if there's no agenda, then I might as well see my wife real quick, or I go to Europe and watch some games, connect with coaches there, and see, you know, how they're doing there. You know, went to see Celtic against Glasgow Rangers or whatever, where, you know, we had 3 boys there. It felt like there is a way of looking at things purely out of Korea, and then there's another way of looking at things if you actually have the international vision, which you guys have as well, because you live in a different place. And that kind of is colliding a bit.
Yeah, and what makes me curious though when it comes to that is, did you, like, it was out there in the media, obviously, you know, evidently and obviously, but did you ever feel that sort of pressure from the federation, the need for you to be in Korea more than you thought you had to be there? Did you ever feel that from the leadership from the PFA?
I knew that within the federation, maybe there are different opinions on that, you know. But for me, important were always the president and the general secretary and the people around me that worked with me, you know. And they all were fine. They all said fine. You know what? Obviously, a couple of people would like you to see more, but if there's nothing to do, why should you then be here? And then the ones that were totally on my side, saying you're doing the right thing here, because at the end of the day, we want to improve as a program, we want to improve as a overall national team, and we're on the right track.
Right, and you spoke about there, you know, maybe being an agenda, and maybe that was a bit of an issue. But had there been an environment that kept you to be more productive in Korea, would your outlook on where you reside throughout your time in Korea, would that have changed at all?
Oh, definitely. I mean, if you have things kind of specifically that you need to get done or need to be pushed forward, or they ask for change in certain areas of the federation or the game or in general, then it's a pleasure for you as a representative of the federation to move these things in that direction.
Yeah.
But there was none.
And last thing I want to ask you on that is, do you feel like Korea is kind of restricting themselves from, you know, maybe working with some of the great coaches around the world because they have a very specific demand when it comes to where they want the coach to be?
Well, I think it's colliding there between different way of thinking within their own society and maybe the media landscape as well.
Sure.
I think there's a part of the media landscape that said he's doing exactly the right thing. You know, he has to lead us to a World Cup in a different continent, and he understands all these continents. And then there's the traditional other side of the media that says, no, he has to do it our way. But for doing it their way, there's no need for an international coach. Then you choose better a Korean coach that does it your way. But then obviously you're gonna go to a World Cup in the US or Mexico and Canada. When you go to that World Cup, you need knowledge about the teams you play against, and you need knowledge about the place where you're going to be. So you can have that discussion all day long. Yeah.
Coach, before we wrap up, any words that you might have for the Korean football fans? What contributions do you hope that your time have made in Korean football that maybe that's something Korea can take into the future as they get ready for the World Cup that's coming up in about a year and a half?
Well, all I would love to say to them is that they're on the right track. You know, they have a very good team, very talented players. You know, they're improving and they can aim higher. I think they should be confident to aim higher and to speak it out, speak up, you know. And the experience I made, you know, with the kind of the hierarchy system between young and old, I wish for them that they get better. You know, if that tension is really as big as people tell me they are, I wish that for them. But I think they can believe in more, you know, and should believe in more and become more ambitious about it. Yeah, and sometimes maybe to have a little bit more of a global look than just inner Korean in a certain way. But I loved this 1 year of experience. I loved the people that I met. I loved every day I go into a language school. I had a blast, I had wonderful teachers, and I met so many nice people. So I will be always a Korean fan.
That's great.